In this lesson, we're going to add the last few finishing touches to finish up our project. Okay, so in our last lesson, we just left off here about halfway through finishing the polishing of our project. And one last thing that I want to do on this first half is just to kind of turn down this % sign here. It just looks a little bit dark to go with the rest of that composition. So we'll go back inside that 3 shapes comp, and let's just go ahead and choose that layer with the % sign on it. And let's go ahead and bring up our character panel, and it looks like we have just kind of a gray color here, so I'm going to click that. We'll just make it a little bit lighter than that original gray we had chosen. If I come back out to my main composition, that just looks a little easier on the eyes. It doesn't look quite so dark. And I also want to make sure that I am maintaining that blending mode that we are having on this set of shapes. So let's go ahead and turn that to multiply. And that just looks a little bit better there. And then let's go ahead and scrub forward. And I want to work a little bit on this area here for the timing. So it kind of seems like these videos are maybe popping up a little bit late. And then whenever we have our person drop in, this whole area here just feels a little bit rushed. So I want to go ahead and just right about at this point here, we'll go ahead and have the videos begin. So I'm just going to grab that videos layer and drag it back so that it starts at the same place as my current time indicator. And then we also have quite a long time here before our circles reveal on. So I think that we can probably push this transition to happen a little bit later. So I'm just going to push it forward to about right here. And then we'll go ahead and grab the video's exit keyframes, and we'll push those a little bit later in time. And then if we're going to do that, we probably want to move our person's transition to happen a little bit later as well. So I'll just go ahead and drag this forward. And something that I think might just reinforce our motion a little bit better is instead of having our person coming in from the top, maybe we want to have them come in from that left side so the motion of the person is consistent with the motion of our videos. So let's just go ahead and change that keyframe really quickly. So I'll just select that person icon comp, hit the P key, and then we'll come over here to that first frame. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so I can see those keys better. And I'll just delete my first key. And then with my current time indicator at that same place, I'm just going to drag him a little bit over to the left. And just make sure that this little guy is out of frame. And we'll go ahead and add some easy ease to his motion. So I'm just going to select both of those keys, come up there to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. And he also needs to have motion blur turned on, so you can go ahead and turn on that switch. So now let's just start about right there where our camera begins to pan up and do a quick frame preview to see if we fix the timing and that looks good as it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and watch that RAM preview back now. That just looks a little bit cleaner for that to come in earlier, and the timing of that looks better. But I think we could probably play a little bit with our camera animation as well to fix just a little bit of the jerkiness that I feel here. So I also want to pay attention to this video here. Doesn't quite make it far enough off of the composition. So let's just push that one a little bit further. Just come in there, snap to that keyframe. And we'll push that just a little farther to the right there. And let's just go ahead and end our composition at that point. So I'm just going to drag that back. And if you want to, you can add an easy ease to those keyframes. I'll just select both of those and hit F9. So that's just going to make that a little more fluid. Now let's talk about our camera movement for a moment. So it looks like our camera kind of zooms up here, stops at this point. We don't really get any kind of secondary motion there. It's just kind of static, so it feels like that takes a long time even though there really isn't much happening there. And then I'll scrub forward here. And this part here also feels pretty static. So maybe this last keyframe here, we can go ahead with our null object and just bring it in a little bit closer, kind of reframe this shot. So I'm just going to grab that Z handle and come closer to these objects. Maybe scoot it over a little bit to the right so we can see these numbers. Just make sure those are the most important part of the shot. And then this keyframe here, we could probably just set to an auto Bezier so it doesn't feel like such a hard stop. So I'm just going to hold Control and double click that key. Now let's do a quick RAM preview just to see the changes that we've made. And you definitely want to make sure that your RAM preview is set to a quarter resolution, just like it was in our last lesson, so you're not taking too much time to do these quick RAM previews. Okay, so the videos come in. That just looks a lot better, just a lot cleaner, and it doesn't feel rushed. And one of the things I'm noticing as I'm scrubbing through this area right here is the camera just feels like it floats a little bit back the other direction. And that's just kind of that spatial interpolation that we talked about earlier. So I'm just going to highlight all of these keyframes that you see right there. And we'll go up there to Animation, Keyframe Interpolation, and just make sure the spatial interpolation is set to linear. Okay, and then we can do another RAM preview of that just to watch that through. And you just want to make sure that you're checking everything and that everything seems like it just makes sense in your video. And one of the things I'm noticing here is that we used the swatches for all the rest of the colors that we've been using so far for these circles. But I feel like it might just make a little bit more sense for what we're talking about here, since we're kind of talking about social media, to use colors that are more associated with those types of social media. So come back over here to your project panel and we'll just open up that graphics panel there. And I want to grab those social swatches. So just go ahead and drag that out there. And we just have two small little color samples that we can use to change this up a little bit. So this looks like that's going to be our brown circle. So to change the color for that, you want to go into Effect Control since that circle was generated. And we'll just color pick this darker blue for that one. And then we'll come in there and do the same thing for the yellow one. And we'll color pick that more kind of sky blue color you have there. And then we're not going to be using those swatches anymore, so you can just go ahead and delete that from the timeline. And we can do the same thing for the other swatches that we had there as our reference the whole time. And now that we're at this point in our timeline, I'm noticing that as these swing down, they don't have any motion blur on them. So I want to set the motion blur up for these layers. And we can go ahead and just turn that on for all of those circles you see there. However, the motion blur is only going to affect the circles when we're doing this camera move. But here at the beginning, if I scrub back here, these are not having any motion blur applied to them just because of the way that we have our transition happening. So I'm going to come in here and give it a force motion blur, just like we did earlier. So come up there to Window. We'll go ahead and open up our effects and presets. And you just want to type in force motion blur here in the search. Okay, so force, there it is. And then I'll just go ahead and grab that top circle, and you can see that that's already being applied there as that edge begins to get blurry. Okay, so we've applied that to all three of those, and that's going to just make that look a little bit more polished there at the end. And I'm also noticing that our person we have here is interacting a little bit strangely with this circle. The coloring there just looks a little bit off. And if I scrub forward, you notice that that changes. So we're getting a little bit of a flicker there. So I'm just going to pull him a little bit more forward in Z space to help kind of solve that issue. So I'm just going to go right about -82 for him, and we'll see if that fixes our problem. So that looks a lot better right there. If I just scrub through, he's no longer interacting so strangely with that red color. Okay, so let's scrub forward in our timeline, see what else we need to fix. Now, I don't like the way that this line is interacting with our shapes, so I think I'd like to set some keyframes just to fade that out as we move across this graph with our camera, and then have that completely faded out once we begin to zoom in on our shapes. So to do that, I'm going to want to pre-compose those layers together. So that's going to be that medium yellow solid you see there and the shape layer 3. So go ahead and select both of those layers, and then we'll hit Control-Shift-C to bring up our pre-comp menu, and we'll just call that graph. And you want to make sure that you collapse transformations just so we can maintain that 3D info. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on the 3D switch just in case we wanted to move that around at all later. And then right about here where that begins to come into frame, let's go ahead and set an opacity key for that. So I'm going to select my layer and just hit the T key to bring up the opacity. And we'll just start it out there at 100%. And then we'll scrub forward just right about here where we begin to zoom in on that graph, and we'll turn that all the way down to 0. So it's just going to slowly fade out across time there. And if you want to, you can add an easy ease to those keys. I'm just going to go ahead and highlight that and hit F9 to do that. And my percent sign is really the only thing sticking around at this point inside of that circle. So I want to go into my 3 shapes comp and make sure that that's gone by the time our camera begins to move over there. So just go ahead and double click that. And then we'll just grab that percent sign and hit Alt close bracket to trim that to our current time indicator. And then you see if I move forward, that goes ahead and kind of just fixes that issue. Okay, now let's go back out to our main composition. And I'm just going to do a quick RAM preview to watch this through in real time from right about here. So I'll go ahead and hit that B key just to trim my work area to the beginning there. And then I'll drag that all the way out to the end just so we can watch what we have left. And it looks like, because we went ahead and took out those other layers.
Learn online. Wear what you want. We don't care.
Our wiggle is no longer interacting strangely with the rest of the composition. So we don't really need to worry about that wiggle changing our colors at all. Really the only thing that I think I might change at this point for this is just to fade on the words and the type right there with that audio a little bit sooner. So maybe just right there as it begins to turn that lighter green color, we'll just grab both of those layers and we can pull that back to our current time indicator so that happens a little bit sooner. Then you can drag out that type layer so that that will remain till the very end. And so usually at this point, after I go through everything and kind of just check it, I might go back in with the graph editor to change any of my speed, maybe see what else needs to have some easy ease added to it, and just do one more final going over. So that would be a great thing for you to do on your project now, and just have a critical eye on your own. Just kind of use some of these techniques that we've done so far to just come back in and finish up polishing your project. But for now, I feel like we've done a pretty good job of fixing any kind of issues that we were having, and the project is looking pretty good. And at this point, we are ready to send it to our render queue. So that's what we're going to talk about in our next lesson.